Aaren is a student from the University of Victoria, and he first got into the field through being the community kitchen coordinator with the James Bay community projects. And some highlights in his young but growing career have been sitting on a discussion panel with Dr. Vanadana Shiva and developing a conceptual framework for food literacy. Aaren will be describing the concept of food literacy in the context of a UVic project that he's been working on, looking at the many facets present within food literacy in the Capital Regional District. So welcome, Aaren. Thanks very much for coming.
How's everyone doing today? Is the mic on, or?
Looks like it.
Okay. That's good. Great. So I'm here to talk about, kind of with the introduction, conceptual frameworks of food literacy. Working on a project, the Food Literacy Participatory Action Research Project. So the project started off as just this 4-month project with a simple idea of generating a case for the creation of a community food animator. Just by creating an inventory of what was already happening in the CRD around food literacy, we realized that the project was a lot bigger than anticipated. Now it has turned into a 1-year project with the potential for 3 years more. During this process, we continue to categorize and define food literacy. Food literacy is a new term, and there's really not a lot of literature out there about it. Many of the definitions have crossover, but personally I find not one definition truly encompasses the scope of food literacy. Before I jump into the definitions of food literacy, I want to just touch on why food literacy is important. Even if policies and distribution systems are in place, if a person cannot select or cook their food, they're going to be food insecure. For me, this is an important aspect because it is the intersection between food security and people being food self-reliant. So I have 2 definitions for you on food literacy. There's a micro definition and a macro definition. The micro definition is a conceptual framework that we've developed. This focuses on the individual and the way they handle food. So the way I like to see it is through their hands, their mind, and their heart. So food confidence, food savvy, and food connections. I know it's probably a little bit hard to see here because of the light, but there's different, it's kind of like a Venn diagram for it. So the first area that we have was food confidence. And food confidence includes the knowledge, skills, ability, and belief to be food self-reliant. So that's the hand skills. So we're talking about cooking classes and different things like that. People are really learning how to get their hands into food. The next one we have is food savvy, which relates to the applicability and importance of food from a personal, community, and environmental perspective. Food savvy would be using your head to connect with food. So when you have something like a good food box, there's going to be recipes within that food box. Learning how to deal with that food and applying those recipes to different food is kind of the head connection or the food savvy of food. The next one is food connections. Food connection reflects on appreciation of and awareness that food serves a social, community, and cultural need. This one's my favorite because it's the heart. It's why people actually get involved into food. So we're talking about things like cultural meals, like the Ukrainian Center holds, different things, events that involve food are really that connection to food. Even just having something like a family dinner where you're having dinner with your family and you're all eating and talking around food, that's really the connection to food. The next definition we have is by Vinjan and Gallegos. Their definition of food literacy is a collection of interrelated knowledge, skills, and behaviors required to plan, manage, select, prepare, eat food to meet the needs, determine food intake. Food literacy is the scaffolding that empowers individuals, households, communities, or nations to protect diet quality through change and support dietary resilience over time. So that's a big definition, and still it's missing some aspects. So you can see it's a complicated term, and there's still a lot of layover between the two as well. So this one really takes on the macro perspective when it comes to communities and nations for it. So they have a diagram that came along with it. And this one really looks at the economic, environmental, and social aspects of food literacy. So both models have crossover, but also there's some areas that are quite different. As we continue to do research on our project, we're realizing that food literacy is dependent on the person and the setting that food literacy is happening. For example, individuals who teach food literacy programs, such as community kitchens, will have a different continuum or area that they're really wanting to increase their food literacy compared to their participants. Therefore, criteria to measure their food literacy will be completely different than the participants. So when we're looking at doing our research project that is settings-based, it's looking at kind of what is the individual doing within that setting to increase their food literacy, and if we're wanting to help move someone along the continuum, then we have to take a look at the setting that the individual's in before we even start to move them along that continuum. So we're going to kind of bring it back to you. I think a lot of people here already have some experience with food literacy, working in community kitchens, canning workshops. Right now we're looking for a 3-year proposal. So we're developing it right now, and we're wanting to kind of look at what is happening within your communities. Is there areas that you see that are missing from definitions of food literacy? Where do you get your food information from? And what activities or programs help your community learn more about food? So I'd like to bring it back to you and kind of create a little bit of discussion of what you see happening in your community around food literacy. Does anyone want to?
I'm Barbara Woodward, and I live here in Canada Bay, very far. But I've been an organic farmer here for 18 years, and supplying food to the valley in the area. And, sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. I've been involved in a lot of programs over the years, and one of the most amazing things our farm has done is hosted well over 1,000 people who have from all over the world to participate within soil apprenticeships, internships. So we've been able to really amass a huge amount of information about what predominantly young people know and don't know about food they eat from all over the world. And what we concluded they know very little, far too little, and it's actually getting worse. And it's alarming to me, really, really alarming. And I think we really need to get in on the ground level when we begin to school, because it's not happy education isn't happening in families, because the younger generation now is being raised by a generation of parents just below me who have grown up illiterate in food. So it's now being passed on to the next generation. My mom, who is 90 and still alive, eats most meals with us and grew up where time still stood still in East Prussia, and they farmed what would have been like for hundreds of years. And the young people are fascinated. They're absolutely fascinated, because it's like listening to somebody from a time they can't relate to, but it's actually what we seem to be getting back to. And so they're all interested, but it truly is scary how little. They're all going to university, they're all highly educated, they come from predominantly good homes, but they are so food illiterate. They have no idea why they're eating, what they're eating, what goes into the food they're eating. They don't, very few know about GE, like we're educating from the ground level all the time. So I see this is only going to change if we get programs into the school and even the preschools. And these programs are beginning to show up, but I think we could really do a lot of work with that here in Vancouver.
Yeah, definitely impacting the food security. So then you kind of bring into the question, if a student is still able to access the food, but they don't know how to grow it, how to cook it, they're getting most of it from a package, are they actually food secure? They're eating 3 meals a day. They may be eating even healthy. So it brings on those questions. Sorry, the woman behind you first.
Oh,
Raised her
sorry.
hand.
I just wanted to comment on the two definitions. The second one is linear, and I can see how you're pushing over, like, helping people moving along, but I really see it as connected a lot more, like the first one, where, just as Barbara touched on, it should be kind of connected back in terms of teaching. You see what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
so
there's
that
a circle
this
to it.
information is like a circle, so that it actually gets to feed into each other, so that the parents can teach the kids and the kids can teach their own, and it keeps going. So I think that's one piece that perhaps is missing.
That intergenerational
Yeah.
type of knowledge.
Connection, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point.
Every time I have come in contact with government officials with food and advise them what to eat, I have always been handed the Canadian food pyramid, always, coming from either the local authority or dietitian or even workshops. What's with that? I mean, because the Canadian food pyramid is horrible. And even the examples that they use, everything is based on packaged food or processed breads or pasta or all that stuff. So even Viva does that. So how does that work? I mean, why is it that we're looking at a different way of telling people, or even for ourselves, what to eat if the food information is coming from such a well-established but outdated?
And that's a really good point. So how many people here actually use the Canada Food Guide as part of a teaching tool?
Dietitian, and she's the
Yeah.
dietitian too, but I really feel that the food industry is taking over the ability for people to actually learn to cook. And food comes in packages now, so we really are trying to let people know about local food and trying to grow your food part of food skills. So Canada's Food Guide is kind of a little bit of a guide, but we really want to encourage people to eat real food.
So then what do you use then to teach? If you don't use the Canada Food Guide and you want someone to take something home, what do people use then to...
There's I think Harvard made food guides that are both based on ancestry and also where you live partly. So it was when I was research project on milk and how many people are actually lactose intolerant. Like it's only a minority of people in the world that evolved to be able to digest milk. So Harvard made different food guides with research that's not funded by any food company like the Canada Food Guide. And it explains that, like, if you have indigenous ancestry, you probably shouldn't eat any dairy products at all. And if you come from Northern Europe, dairy might be a bigger aspect of your culture or whatever. So those are interesting resources.
Commenting on this particular issue, that becomes another choices because 95% of the agriculture industry is almost is dairy. Like pretty much 95%. Every farm that you see is a dairy farm. So how do you counteract that? If the local economy is based on something that is not good for you, it's really, really hard. Based on other, very, very, very low industry.
And can I ask that people speak up a little louder? I'm having
Yeah.
trouble hearing because of these machines, and I'm sure that others are.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Sorry, we had another comment as well.
What I want to bring up and address is that I'm Indigenous from a First Nations community, 45 minutes northwest of Filipino. Our only access is by boat. So food literacy doesn't even hang on us because right now we're in a food crisis. They just recently, in the past 6 months, opened up a food bank that's community run. So we got people in a limited pool donating to other people in this limited pool. And so, how does food literacy address Indigenous communities that are in severe food crisis? We have zero food security right now. And the thing that I've noticed is that there's not a lot of representation of Indigenous people at a lot of these things. I find that I go to stuff, and I'm usually the only one. but I find that the topic is not very often brought up about Indigenous communities and how, before we can even get to the point of food literacy, how we can even like start to address food security. So I run a community garden and compost in my community, but I mean, this is all really good things to know, but we also need to remember there's like, there's like zero food security in over 200 communities across BC that are all Indigenous communities. And so we live in the community of Ahousaht, 45 minutes northeast of us by, or southeast of us by boat is Tofino, which is like, rich in food security. But one of the things that I wanted to point out was our food security is in terms of a colonial food worldview. So when it comes to colonial foods, we are in a very huge food crisis, but when it comes to seafoods or foods that we pick off of the land or things like that, then we have more of a security. Like I've got a freezer full of fish, but like people can't afford rice, they can't afford potatoes or things like that. So these are just things that I'd like to bring up and always mention is to remember is that, like food literacy is so important, but also even just putting food on a table in impoverished communities is kind of a really big focal point for me.
And I think that's part of the food literacy. I'm Wanda Martin, I'm part of the project. But I think that's part of what's missing in the definition of food literacy is the idea of people who have the food security already, recognizing food and food. Part of that idea of how can we be more better educated around some of the real those issues.
It's even in Tofino, when I bring it up, people are like, no, that's impossible. I'm like, no, really, we're in a food security crisis. We had to do a food drive. And people didn't understand. It was like, how do you recognize and know your neighbors well enough to be able to resources, like because we're rural and remote, like, so those are things that, I always want to do. What are the outlying communities, what's happening? We used to be self-sufficient in food right up until they put the highway in, and then that was bringing all of these different food items, but we used to have chickens and goats, and everybody had their own garden, so we're trying to, within one generation we lost that, now I'm trying to bring it back. So that was
I think that has to do, again, why we're kind of looking at we started to just say, okay, there's going to be one definition of food literacy for everyone.
Yeah.
And there's really not. You have to look at the settings and the individuals within those settings. What type of access to food do they have? And then what are they doing around that food? Because you're right, there is different types of food literacy. There is traditional food literacy, and depending what community you're from and what your ancestors are, you're going to have a really different concept of food than someone who has just completely different background. And so taking into account that way and looking at it makes it a lot more complex. I'm just going to go from someone who hasn't spoken yet.
Hi, so one of the things that I asked questions about is in terms of background from a bit more of an academic background. So the idea of food literacy is there's a lot of focus on corporate control over the food supply. But I think there has to be, and there's been suggestions in the literature, but I separate control over the supply from something also important, which is control over the discourse in a way in which food literacy is communicated. So one of the things that I think people understand well are calories, but they don't necessarily understand food. So they understand fat, but they don't know what fat does to the body. They understand so on and so forth, carbohydrates and salt and sugar. Like you can get these things are good or bad, or they characterize them as such without really having a sense of how to grow food farmers suggested, or where to get certain types of foods that are going to be related to their past, that are going to have a connection to them, that are going to connect with their ancestry or their family history. So like this is typically like the nutritionist paradigm that Georgie Scranton wrote about, and then also the anthropology. So one of the things that's missing from definitions of food literacy is a critique, a sustained critique against definitions that are really reductionist, which we have here in probably measure, but in general, if you've got Coca-Cola controlling the food that people get, but also helping to define what counts as healthy food, is a problem.
And that's something I wonder too, is that for someone who is dealing with food insecurity issues, is it fair to bring on that aspect within food literacy, or is this just something that should be talked about right now with people who are teaching food literacy classes and different things like that. So that's something, like I play with in my mind. I don't know the answer to. I'm just wondering how we're doing for time.
Yeah, I've seen under 5 minutes.
Okay, great. Let's go for it. Yeah, go for it. And then
This sort of connects to both of them, so I forgot your name, but one thing I think family and what food is in terms of the heart, what you were talking about with the heart, the emotional connection that we have with food. So someone grows up in a family where craft dinner is really comforting to them. How do we shift that? Is it possible to shift that? Because I almost think this course is powerful enough to shift that. And that's the thing I come up against in the community I work in. I also help out in the community garden. But how do we shift that? Because I think it really is about the emotional place for people and that connection of emotion to food.
no, I agree.
Yeah, from my experience of talking to people and trying to get engaged in food literacy or growing their food or cooking their food or tasting food, I think the biggest challenge is that what I hear over and over again is that we don't have time. We're so busy, like a single mother is their priority, is their family, and they're always looking for shortcuts. But it is possible to make nutritious meals and do it quickly. It just takes a little bit of organization. But the problem is that we've become disconnected with our food. We don't know how to cook. I look at my own son, and every time he comes to visit, I show him how to make something so that he can go home and know how to make something. It's just ridiculous how the kids really don't know how to cook anything. And because of that, they come to rely on corporate systems where it's packaged food, it's easy, and they don't have to learn anything. All they do is turn on a button, put it in the microwave, or heat it up. So we've got a really big hurdle there.
It's huge, yeah, because we first to have the packaged food to save time, and now we're realizing, we don't have time to make food, and we really want to start cooking our food and all those things.
That lady was ahead of me, but I really do want to have a chance to add something to this conversation.
Okay, go for it. Then you, and then over there.
I guess just when we're talking about discourse and language, it's hard to communicate the values behind getting whatever it is you need to get out of food and whatever message you're trying to face. But it's that experiential component that creates those emotional attachments. So you can tell the kids that eating craft dinner might comfort them and it's bad for you and don't do it, or you can expose them to creating a meal, learning how to eat something from scratch, making a really positive environment around that so that you get that emotional connection that way. A lot of times I think we focus too much on the verbiage behind food literacy and not the experience. That's what food is, and it's an experience for all of us. It's what unites us as animals and on this planet and how we interact with that. And so I really do think that experiential piece is the key to it all. But making that accessible to families, I really do see a lot of pressure being put on the school systems to teach our kids everything. And I see that in outdoor education or environmental education. I see that with food. I see it with a lot of health initiatives. And yes, it's because we have this generational gap that perhaps my generation is included in that, and that new current good stuff. But I think the key thing there is that unless you have your parents being a good role model, it doesn't matter so much necessarily what you're taught at school. So unless we're educating parents and giving parents and families those opportunities to learn how to make positive, good family memories surrounding good quality food, I think that's
I agree with you, and I agree with you. I think that the community as a whole is a huge part of it. And I want to address your item number 3 there, what activities or programs help the community learn more about food. I come at things from many levels, but I'm mainly here today in a political level. And I would like to address the topic of community gardens. I don't know what benefit they are in other communities, but in my community, it's a very elitist affair. There's 20 people who pay a fee and have the privilege of being able to grow their own food, which they share with no one. So I don't see the value of our community garden to anybody except those 20 people. And I would really like to see a definition going to food literacy around community gardens, how they truly can be community gardens that would include a farm stand, and I see that as being our policymakers, of which I'm one, job to help put that together.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see a lot of different, some community gardens are going to be very ambitious and things like that, but same with cooking. If you're a chef and you're high up there, you're going to be elitist about your cooking sometimes, but there are also going to be people that come together and cook together. Should there be both in a community? Maybe. I know with the research that we have done, we found that Oak Bay in Victoria, which is more of a well-off neighborhood, tends to only have cooking classes in that area. There's no community kitchens, there's nothing like that. But people have the money to afford to go to these expensive cooking classes. And that's still building food literacy, and people from that setting really need that type of food literacy, kind of food education program to move them along their food literacy continuum. So I think both are needed, but yes, community gardens, how should they be interpreted? That's definitely a part of food literacy. We're starting to take it into incorporation into our project.
Aaren, I think we're going to wrap
Okay.
up there.
Wonderful.
Okay, but
So
thank you very much for leading us in the first conversation, and hopefully we can continue.